electricity, gas, mortgage. Hi, welcome to another Broken Meeple review. I'm Luke Hector and, whoa, do you really need me to explain? If you're a gamer, you've heard of this game. I'm just going to get it out right now. Rising Sun. This one, whoa, trying to fall off there. Hype doesn't even begin to describe what this game has basically had following it all this time, whilst it was being on Kickstarter, whilst it's being made and produced, and recently now as the fulfillments are being sent out to backers, and some people have got theirs and have been playing it relentlessly, self-included. It's been basically awaited for so long. For those of you few rare people who aren't in the know as to what Rising Sun is, basically it was touted as a kind of successor to Blood Rage, one of the most popular games to come out from 2015. And even though this isn't a direct sequel to it, it bears some similarities whilst being different in its own right. With Rising Sun, on a map of areas of, well, fictional Japan essentially, you are going around with your various samurai, bishis and shinto and that kind of thing, and you're trying to control areas in order to get victory points, money, and various other power-ups. However, you are also able to summon monsters of gargantuan size across your borders in order to assist you. You can collect cards that give you special abilities and special powers. You can summon kame gods, is it kame or kami? I don't know, but K-A-M-I. Kami gods to assist you with giving you bonuses. There's a lot you can do in this game, and the main thing is that it's just, oh my god, overproduced like crazy. As is always with Cool Mini or Not, this is kind of their shtick. They like to overproduce every game. And in this case, it's no exception. Here you have got a fabulous looking board with phenomenal artwork across it. You have got miniatures, multiple sculpts for your basic guys. You've got screens. You've got really nice looking cards with the various abilities and the monster pictures on them. And you have giant miniatures for these various monsters. I mean, your monster could literally be about this big, or it could be that big, that wide. There are some insane things in here. You know, do you have the simple sort of a fox ninja type thing that's like shrouded in a cloak? Or do you have the giant river dragon with its huge model as it's like balanced on a rock face or so? It's, honestly, the production in this is nothing short of stellar. Now, this is no surprise for Cool Mini or Not. They tend to do stellar production generally, but here they've gone all out. They've gone all out and beyond. This is the best looking game I have seen from Cool Mini or Not ever. There is no shadow of a doubt. Now, before I continue, I will stipulate that this is a Kickstarter game that I purchased. So I put my own money into this one. This is not a review copy. But that does not make me biased to deciding what I think of this game. If I put money towards this and I don't think it hits the mark, I'm going to be disappointed and, you know, somebody else will probably nab the game off me. But if I put my money to this and think, oh, it's actually a pretty good game, I'm going to hang on to it. Whether it's worth that money or not in the end, well, we'll get to that later. Rising Sun's gameplay features a selection of tiles with 4 different actions that you can pick from and 2 copies of each. There is a track along the top of the board which players will take it in turns to place a tile face up, and they will perform this specific action, and so will all the other players. However, previous to this, you are able to enter into alliances with other players in order to gain special bonuses when these tiles are played. You do not have to be in an alliance, but there are advantages and disadvantages to doing so. Although I would probably argue that there's more advantages than disadvantages. So you want to be in an alliance every now and again. You can only ally with one person, so you might ally with your friend next door, 2 other players across the table might ally themselves, and you might have 1, maybe 2 who just decide, yeah, you know what, we don't need an alliance this round, we're going to do our own thing. The actions involve moving your models around the board and recruiting more to the board, acquiring cards, summoning monsters, and eventually betraying your allied player in order to exchange your models for theirs.
A shameful display!
Unfortunately, this has a cost. This whole game, being kind of, feudal Japan theme, is based on an honor system. You have an honor track that your factions are on, and this is the universal tiebreaker for everything. No matter what it is, timing, attacks, card buying, anything, any kind of dispute you have in the game is settled by the honor system. Who has the most honor, they get to decide, or they get priority. Simple, but very effective system. It just gets rid of a lot of unnecessary sort of complicated rules about, oh, if you tie with this, you should do this, and if this unknown situation happens, then you should do this. No, just say, look, are you the highest in honor? You do it. Perfectly simple, why not? During the whole round, you will be selecting these tiles and activating powers of kami gods in order to gain bonuses, before eventually your troops will fight in a big war phase, where various countries in a specific sequence, determined randomly every round, will engage in a combat. Now combat, there is no dice here, this is pretty much deterministic combat. You have a certain amount of force, as it's called, and so will your opponent based on the models you have. Cards might influence this, other factors might influence this, and you have a secret bidding phase where you will place gold on this board that gives you advantages in combat. You reveal, and whoever has spent the most money on a particular advantage will get that advantage. Spend tokens for more force, take other players' pieces hostage, or if you feel like it, commit seppuku and just kill all your forces and gain honor and victory points. Sometimes if you know you're going to lose the fight, it's better to just go, oh well, and just take yourself out, because at the end of the day, if you're going to die anyway, might as well get something for it. It's a pretty simple system. Granted, you have to kind of just watch 2 other people having a combat every now and again, but eventually it will get to your turn and you'll have a similar experience. You carry on through 3 seasons of this, spring, summer and autumn, before eventually you get to winter, which is a final scoring phase. Game doesn't sound that complex, does it? And funny enough, it's not. I expected this to be a lot more complex than it actually is. Now that's not to say that this is a light game. No, I'm not teaching gateway players for this, or even bringing it as a next step. This has got a fair amount of meat to it. But the rules themselves are very straightforward. It's actually pretty streamlined. I never found myself having to go into the rulebook very often to check rules. I either already knew them in my head after just watching a couple of playthroughs and reading the book, or they were just intuitive to players. Now granted, you must make certain you do not get a single rule wrong, because otherwise you will break this game like nobody's business. I have seen players play this where they accidentally forgot, for example, that when you finish a war phase with another player, you have to give the loser money out of the stuff that you bid with. If you forget to do that, you break this game in every way, which way but loose. It's, you cannot afford to get a rule wrong, but the rulebook's very clear, it's easy enough to reference the rules. I don't normally have such a good time with Kumino Not's rulebooks, but on this occasion it seems to have done pretty well and shouldn't be too hard for most players to get into the game. Now the game stipulates player count from 3 to 5. I think you might be able to have 6 with the expansions included, but to be honest, I find that I would be more happy to play this with 3 or 4 players than I would 5. Not to say that I think 5 is a bad count. It's more that 5 mainly adds more time. But this Rising Sun scales very well based on it, because you have the alliances for a start. So if you've got 3 or 5 players, yes, you may have one person who's there on his own, but it won't necessarily be every round. And again, there are a couple of advantages to being outside of an alliance. In 4 players, you'll typically get 2 teams of 2, and that works very well. Now, for time-wise, adding another player does add a fair amount of time to the game, but it never gets too long for its own good, except for the first game. It's one of those classic times where the first game is going to be long, pretty long. We're talking like over 3 hours possibly for a full 5-player experience where you're just learning the game. But that's because there's a lot to take in, and a lot of players will be like, I'm not entirely certain if I'm doing the right thing here. Oh god, there's all these cards. What can I pick from there? Best way to do this war pit? I don't know. And, that's fair play. There's a fair amount to take in. But after the first game, you quickly start getting this done in less than 2 hours. 2.5 absolute tops with 5 players, and that's if you've got slow players. But usually I've been finding that with 5 players, I can still wrap this up in about the 2 hour mark. With 4 or 3 players, even less. This is not quite Scythe territory, where Scythe can be played with like 6 to 7 players in under 90 minutes when you know what you're doing. But it's pretty good. I mean, 90 minutes is a good length for, say, a 3-player game of this. And you're involved, you're doing all sorts of, you're doing all the actions, you're in the alliances, you're in combat. It's not like you're just sitting there doing nothing for half the game. However, the main thing that stops me wanting to play this with 5 players, and it's a small gripe. I will play this with 5 players and I will still enjoy it. But this has a turn sequence similar to how Le Havre works. If you don't know Le Havre, it's an Uwe Rosenberg Euro game where you're running a harbour. And it had a turn sequence where you flipped these tiles, about 7 of them, and you took it in turns, one by one, and you picked up stuff from various spaces. Now, the turn sequence in that, because there were 7 spaces, meant that you got a certain amount of actions per round, but it was never even among all the players. If you had 3 of you playing, typically you would get 2 actions a round, and 3 if you were fortunate, like in a particular round. With 4, that suddenly went down to potentially 1 action in the round, and probably 2. And 5 players, it was just horrible, because most of the time you got 1 action in the round, and occasionally you would get 2. And that just never felt very fulfilling. You never felt like you'd get anything achieved. Even though, in some cases you could, but it also dragged the game out like nobody's business. Rising Sun has a similar thing to that, but it's not quite as bad. You have only a certain amount of spaces for the tiles, and if you have less players, you will get to do more in a round before you get to the war phase. Now, of course, everybody acts on every tile, but in terms of actually picking the tile and getting the bonus if you're allied, you're essentially only doing that when it's your turn to pick the tile. And with 3 players, you're getting at least 2 times, possibly 3. And 4 or 5, it does the same thing as I mentioned with Le Havre. Here though, it's not too bad. The turn sequences aren't that long, the downtime is not that long, certainly for a game that involves all these models and that. So comparing that to Le Havre's turn sequence, this is better. And nowhere near as bad, hence I will still play this with 5 and have a great time. But I'm really loving this with 3. I mean, yeah, I know, broken record, but 3 players for this works really well. It's quick, you still get plenty enough combat on the table, because that whole sequence where you select these tiles at random that tell you in which order various territories are going to combat, that scales with the number of players. So if you have less players, you'll have less territories fighting, but you know what those territories are going to be. So you're keen, you're inclined to go to those places and have fights. So you still get these cluster battles even with only 3 of you. And failing that, you may decide that you have a bigger chance of just staying in a territory and harvesting every now and again. In 5 players, it's a little bit more difficult to get an efficient harvest out because everybody is in everybody's faces. It's a different type of game that you're playing with between 3 and 5. Both very entertaining, but, keep that in mind. We've certainly got to talk a bit about the cast, because I paid a lot for this Kickstarter. And if I was to just say, oh, is this game worth that amount of money I paid? Probably not. There's a lot of variety in this box now. There's a lot of content, but it's way too much than I would normally advise anybody to spend on a game. So eventually, when this is on retail release, you will not get some of the Kickstarter exclusive content. However, it's not going to be too bad. The Kickstarter exclusives were mainly extra miniatures, and I believe the Fox Clan was also a Kickstarter exclusive. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I believe that's what it was. And with that, granted you lose a clan. Well, whoopie-doo. You lose a few monsters, it'd be nice to have them, but it's just extra variety. You get plenty of content in the retail box. You get a fair amount of monsters, you get some extra card sets, you still get a good amount of clans, 5 to pick from. And some of the add-ons from the Kickstarter, like the 2 new clans and the extra monster pack, you can bet they'll be sold in stores. They haven't confirmed either way, but they were separate boxes in the Kickstarter. I'm pretty sure that at some point they're going to hit retail release, and so you will be able to add to the variety in this game. However, there's still a good amount of variety in what you get. Plenty of clans, plenty of monsters, plenty of cards. And at the end of the day, there's a slight group dependency to this because of the alliances. When you play this with a different group of players, you will get a different feel for the game because of the way everyone interacts with each other in negotiating and forming alliances. No deals are binding, you can bribe, you've got free reign to do what you like with that, and some people are more susceptible to getting into that kind of roleplay feel than others are. Me, I'll go nuts when I'm in this game doing negotiations and alliances. I love the whole roleplay aspect of that. It's why I like certain games like Sheriff of Nottingham and New Angeles and stuff like that, all these negotiation games. I love it in here as well. It's not a huge part of the game. Granted, you get bonuses and stuff, but it's not like a major focal point. So you don't have to sort of go nuts with it, or don't feel like, oh, I don't want to play this game, it's a negotiation game, I'm not a fan of them. It's a fairly small aspect. You will still have fun with just putting your eyes on the map and baiting the snot out of each other, because that's half of what you're doing in this game. You can get points by non-combat means, but, what you choose to do is up to you, and I've seen plenty of paths to victory. In terms of balance, well, I can't really comment on balance because you'd need to play this about 50 times in order to actually get to that point. But certain cards work better with different player counts, some are better with certain clans, some combo nicely with each other depending on the sets because you use randomized sets of cards every game. So there's certainly a lot of variety that comes up, and lots of different strategies and combos can be filled. You might have one game where, one card seems ridiculous. Like, I remember playing a 5-player game where there was a card called Way of the Serpent. It let you charge money to other players to send models across sea routes. In a 5-player game, that card was ridiculous. I swear he won the game practically with that card.
A shameful display!
But then in the subsequent game, 3 players, the card never really saw much use. Someone bought it, but there was only so much movement along sea routes. So it really does depend on the players, the group, the size, the situation. I certainly haven't seen anything, go overpowered consistently. Somebody will get a great combo and make it work. But it's not like I could say, well, you should do the low-key seppuku strategy every game. No, it doesn't work that way. You've got to get the right cards, you've got to get the right situation, the right monsters, even the right clan ability to work with it. Many people will be trying to compare this to Blood Rage. I would stop there if I were you. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of Blood Rage. I think it's okay, I just thought it was a bit overrated for what it was, but I still enjoyed my time with it. But there were elements of it that I wasn't a fan of, and I feel this one has kind of improved on that. Now, like I said, this is not a sequel to Blood Rage. Both feel quite different to play, but you can't help but notice some of the similarities. You have big dudes on the map fighting each other. You can summon monsters to your aid. Hello, both games can do that. Both use cards in some way, giving upgrades for your clans and that. So there's a lot of similarities between this and Blood Rage that cannot be ignored. But the alliances and negotiation and the way that some of the cards work to give you better bonuses and that, it certainly feels more different to what Blood Rage is. However, this is what I wanted Blood Rage to be in the first place. If you were to ask me to compare the two, this one I think is far better. Now, some people prefer Blood Rage to Rising Sun. Fair enough, different strokes for different folks. But I've played both, I've reviewed both. I think that Rising Sun is the pick of the two for me. So, I don't own Blood Rage, but I have no desire to own it now because I've got this one. Granted, might have to, save up some extra money in order to get other stuff in the future, but yeah, that's Kickstarter for you. So, yes, an excellent game. Personally, I'm really enjoying it. It's gone down well with everybody I know. I've splashed out on it. I've got all the models. I've got this big this big roll mat that goes across the table. And oh yeah, that is one thing. If you've got the mat, or even with the board, this is a table hog. You better have a big table for this, because it will take up space. Particularly if you're one of the Kickstarter people who bought the mat. Woo, it's big. But woo, it's good. It looks so good. The amount of faces that will turn and look at your table when you have that mat laid out with these miniatures is beyond recognition and measurement. It's just everybody wants a piece of this game when they see it on the table. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I've granted, minor nitpicks with it. Certainly for the cost, yeah, I wouldn't advise anybody to go out and buy a Kickstarter pledge, say if someone was selling it for £300-400 or something. No. You can wait. Wait for the retail version. See what they release on retail with the add-ons and then make your decision that way. The retail release is still going to have plenty in the box. And I would still give this my personal sort of BGG rating of 9 out of 10 because, whether it was retail or Kickstarter, I feel it's a solid game in its own right and has plenty of replayability. Having the Kickstarter exclusives simply just ups that even more. But some of it you will be able to get on retail release. So just be patient and eventually you will get your answer, and of course, it's Cool Mini or Not will probably get your money. So that's it for me. A Kickstarter that for once I'm actually pretty pleased with. A lot of Kickstarters tend to fall slightly shallow of the mark for me, or I kind of think maybe I could have got them on retail release. But then on occasion, like for example, no, I didn't get Lisboa on Kickstarter, but I did get Vinyos and I think Gallerist on Kickstarter, and they worked. So like I say, it's just a case that you got to be willing to chuck the money in the first place. And with a lot of stuff on Kickstarter, I do advise people to think 3 times before they start bidding on this stuff. Though I can't talk, how much did I splash on this one? So that's it for me. Rising Sun, solid game. If you've got any liking to Blood Rage, I think you'll get a kick out of this one. If you were a little bit like with Blood Rage, then maybe this will win you over, but I'm not sure. They both have a similar feeling to each other, so maybe if you don't like one, you're not necessarily going to like the other. But I prefer this theme, prefer this art, prefer this style. Rising Sun, solid. Now all I got to do is find a way to store these 2 giant boxes. Yeah, it's a bit of a beast. So that's it for me. I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple review. Take care guys, enjoy, but remember, it's only a game. So don't spend too much money if you can't afford it, alright? Everything else is more important than just buying a board game for that much money. See you next time guys, take care.
Display!